What's up, brick builders? Mayor Brick here. Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so it's been about a week since my last upload, and it's surprising to me how many folks thought I was on the side of Bricks and Minifigs. Absolutely not. I think what they did was incredibly wrong. They just need to get the Lego back. They need to reimburse the Mansell family. They need to take accountability, take ownership. We shouldn't even be here. Like, I can't make that any clearer. The point of my last video was just focusing on the franchise owners that were uninvolved in the situation, who had no way to predict that this was even going to happen, have no ties to corporate other than their franchise model, but they weren't the ones involved in facilitating the move of these Legos or the stealing of them. And I do genuinely feel bad for those people because they're still in their community. They still have stores that they run. They still put their life savings in there. Just because this scandal happened, they don't just, all right, walk away and they're done with it. They still have to figure out how to recover their business. And I understand we're mad at the franchise, we're mad at the name and the guilty by association thought process there. Totally understand the boycotting, but the harassing is what needs to stop. People going to stores, the constant phone calls. These individual franchise owners did nothing to deserve that kind of harassment. If you want to leave a bad review to the company, understood. If you want to not spend your money there and not go to the store, completely understand. But harassing people like teenagers and family members that are there, I just can't condone that, and I'm going to stand by that message that we need to leave those folks alone. I have no affiliation with Bricks Minifigs. I'm not a store location owner. I don't know anybody who owns one. I don't even know anybody who works at one. The nearest one to me is about an hour away, and I rarely go to it. I have no affiliation with Bricks and Minifigs, and I have no affiliation with any of the individual store owners, Reckless Ben, any of the YouTubers. Literally just observing this as a fan of the community with an interest in the legal system. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm not saying anybody did any crimes. There's no threats to anybody. Literally just using my two eyes, my brain, and making conclusions and commentary as I see it. And since all of the information has come out over the past week, specifically the leaked email from corporate showing how these individual stores are supposed to respond, my perception of the whole situation has changed a little bit, and I'm a little bit more critical of the individual store owners now. Now, I just want to say, still feel bad for you guys. Like, you're in an unfair situation. You're battling a corporate scandal that you did not ask to be a part of, and but at the same time, like, you need to speak up. And there's certain things you need to do to protect yourselves. And simply staying silent and letting corporate control what you do and say and how you say it is not it. But what I want to talk about today is a couple of things. There's been a number of releases, videos, press releases, just things going on in this whole saga that is just compounding the impact that the story is having. It's so funny because when you look at the press release that Bricks and Minifigs released, I think last week, and they had that whole outrage scale outlined and the amount of time it takes to go through the different phases. And I think they said we were at or past the midpoint of the outrage cycle. My dudes, I think we are literally like not even on the upward trajectory of that curve. Like, this is just the start. When they posted that, I think Reckless Ben only had maybe, a million and a half views. Since then, we've got Jesus himself, all these different lawyers commenting on it. We're talking like tens of millions of views, and this is only going to continue to grow, especially as Ben releases his videos, all these lawyers that are getting involved. CoffeeZilla is likely going to be releasing a video here shortly. I'm blown away the amount of coverage the story is getting, and I'm glad. In this video, we're going to talk about a couple different aspects of this, kind of analyzing why this is happening the way it is and why Bricks and Minifigs can't just own up and grow a pair. And more importantly, what these franchise owners can do, because there are still things they can do to help save their livelihoods. There is an out for them, and we need to talk through some of those opportunities. But I think the key thing too is they need to also grow a pair. We've seen the same thing over and over and over again from all of these stores. We're independently owned and operated. We have no control to corporate. We have no affiliation to that scenario out in Oregon. We do things completely separate here on our own. We have no directives from corporate, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but I have a question. If you are truly independently owned and operated, why are you not acting and speaking independently? Every owner is posting the same exact statements, the same talking points. They're refusing to criticize corporate. They're turning off their comments to silence any sort of criticism. They're refusing to challenge leadership, and they're refusing to demand accountability. At what point does independently owned and operated start to become a marketing slogan rather than reality? Like, if McDonald's, for example, the CEO of McDonald's went out and did something catastrophically egregious, there would absolutely be franchise owners speaking out about how they don't condone that and they hope they make it right. Yet here we are in total silence. You have to ask yourself, why? Now, this is where things get a little interesting when you start thinking through the psychology behind the corporate entity and the franchise owners throughout the country. Now, you don't need a gun pointed to your head. You don't even need direct threats. But sometimes years of conditioning lead to the same result. Corporate says jump, and the owners ask, how high? And this is where we have a couple questions that we need to ask. Can individually owned and operated franchise owners criticize the CEO? Can they make their own statements? Can they support the Gormans? Can they make their own policy changes? Can they demand top down corporate change? And can they challenge corporate narratives? Because from the outside, it doesn't appear that they can. And that cuts right through the whole independently owned and operated message. When I think of independently owned and operated Lego stores, I'm thinking of places like Wappy Bricks, Dayton Brick Shop, Boston Bricks, Orlando Brick Co., Atlanta Brick Co. Like those are truly independently owned and operated stores. A Bricks and Minifigs location may be independently owned from a family standpoint, but they're not independently operated. In fact, they have FDD, the franchise, what is it, disclosure document, their operating manual. They have a whole lot of crap that tells them how they need to operate. They are independently owned, absolutely, but they are not independently operated. And we are seeing that through this whole cycle. We're seeing the same messaging points. We're seeing the same exact response of shutting off comments, shutting down discourse, not allowing folks to, leave a review for their business. That is not an action that an independently operated store should be taking, is a mass coordinated shutdown of public feedback type of action. But I don't necessarily think that's the franchise owner's fault. They're in a psychological hold. Now, I can't prove exactly what's happening internally, but it sounds like through reading through some of the Reddit posts and the leaked emails and whatnot, that there's an internal Slack community at Bricks and Minifigs where the corporate entity can share information down to the individual store owners. And it sounds like the behaviors that a lot of these individual store owners are exhibiting is a lot like learned compliance, right? People have become accustomed to following directives, not rocking the boat, protecting the brand, and waiting for permission. And again, you have to ask yourself, is this what an independently operated store would do? Is waiting for corporate to tell them what to say and what to do. Eventually, they stop acting like owners and instead they're acting like a manager, another cog in the wheel of the corporate entity. That's what this looks like to me. If your communication is controlled, if your branding is controlled, if your messaging is controlled, if your marketing is controlled, and if your public response is controlled, how independent are you really? Now, I'm going to move away from that topic because I think we all understand that independently owned and operated is just a marketing line at this point. These stores are not independently operated. If they truly were, we would see at least one voice criticizing the actions of corporate leadership. The fact that everybody's so scared to speak out against this only proves the point that they are not independently owned and operated. And no, I'm not criticizing. I understand why they're not doing that because they've literally just seen how corporate can come in and take over a store, seize the inventory, not reimburse them, and you have to go through a whole legal loophole. All you have to do too is look at the videos that document how corporate is talking to these employees. The video of Kai where he says we talked at her, where he said, yeah, I know it sounds like a threat, and it kind of is. The CEO just being completely callous and not a worry in the world about what his image looks like because he's the CEO and he's just used to managing through power. And you're going to comply. And if you don't, too bad. This whole thing literally could have just been avoided by A, giving the inventory back, B, making him whole with the money, or C, corporate should have just taken on this liability from day one. Multi-hundred million dollar company, a small Lego collection that they were only going to make like probably less than 100K in fees after it's all said and done. They could have just made him whole and I taken on that liability and figured it out internally. I don't know why they didn't. I think it's just a behavioral thing. Like they're used to getting their way. Nobody's going to say no. Nobody's going to push back. I'm the CEO. You're going to do exactly what I say, you independently owned and operated store. Okay, so what are the options for the individual franchisees that are on the table today? I see there's a couple different avenues they can go. It's going to be uncomfortable no matter where we go. I just sitting still and not doing a damn thing right now is not going to help anybody because like I said earlier, this is just getting started. This is not going to go away. Their outrage cycle, their time will fade messaging, where is that even coming from? That's just not reality. Okay, so franchisees are not powerless. They can demand change. They do have leverage because without franchisees, there is no franchise. There is no royalty payment back up through corporate. And like the questions I'm asking myself is why has nobody spoken out about the CEO's conduct, about Kai's conduct, about the COO's conduct, even the franchise owners in question? You can just hear how they talk to Ben on the phone with, you have the Lego. I'll give it back to you if you do this. Just kidding. I don't have it. I do have it. You don't have it. The completely unprofessional way that Josh Johnson and Brendan Bass were talking to Ben and his crew, like, it's just ugly. Why is nobody demanding accountability for that? Why isn't anybody asked for the CEO to step down? And why aren't these owners coming together and demanding a special meeting? I mean, maybe they are in the Slack channel. I don't think so, though. I mean, a public announcement would be exactly what they need to do right now. So that's option one, demanding accountability and leadership change at the top. And honestly, that's probably the most approachable option for a lot of these franchise owners. Another option is just like a classic internal revolt. Now, this option is probably a little bit less likely considering how we've seen corporate seize a locally owned and operated store. But an internal revolt would be one of the most powerful moves. Not social media, not YouTube, not commenters, but owners, the people paying the franchise fees, the people funding corporate, the people keeping the lights on, all these franchise owners throughout the country. What happens if 50 owners just decide enough is enough? Now, I don't think that's a realistic option because we're just not going to see it. We haven't seen any of these owners so far publicly speak out against this. And those that do publicly speak out are just repeating the same corporate lines that they were told to say. We haven't seen any of these independently owned and operated franchises come out with an independently owned and operated voice. So the third option here is just getting out of the contract. And the question I have is, can they do that? Now, I am not in any way a lawyer, but I do know that state laws have different regulations and requirements and whatnot for franchises. Some states have very franchisee friendly verbiage. And from some of the videos I've seen getting published, there are provisions in Bricks and Minifigs franchise agreement that defers to state law for certain things. Some states like California, New Jersey, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington, Hawaii have very franchise-friendly environments. Many of these franchise protection states impose duties of good faith, disclosure requirements, and restrictions on franchisor conduct. So some of the questions these franchisees should be raising to a franchise attorney, has there been brand damage? I think we can all agree, abso-frickin-lutely yes. Has there been misrepresentation? Yes. Multiple misinformation statements from Bricks and Minifigs corporate about we didn't know about the agreement, we do know about the agreement, we don't allow consignment. Oh, but we do allow consignment. And regardless of what they say that they did or didn't know, I think it's super important to remember that this agreement was in place for a year before the story even came to light, which means sales were happening on this consigned agreement. Income was coming in from the sales. The Gormans were getting their percentage. They were paying royalties on it up through corporate. And let alone the fact that this was blasted all over the social media channels. And even though Bricks and Minifigs corporate may not have been the ones posting it, they still had awareness of it. Or if they totally disregarded any sort of governance of what their stores were doing, that's on them. But that doesn't mean that, ignorance is bliss and you just get to walk away. This has literally been happening for a year. You were collecting royalties on this at the corporate level. Your Bricks and Minifigs branded social media pages were advertising this consignment deal. Any statement to the contrary today is a misrepresentation of what this actually was. Again, you can dispute it and have your argument in court, but to say you weren't aware of it, you didn't know about the agreement, you don't allow consignments, like that's all just misrepresentation. The third area that franchisees could argue is the failure to protect the franchise system. I know we're talking about just one store up in Oregon, but you could argue that the CEO and the corporate employees, based on their actions, based on how they conducted themselves with this store in Oregon, potentially knowing that they were in the wrong or, were just trying to be a little bit devious behind the scenes, put the entire franchise system at risk. And you could argue that the actions that they took materially harmed the business. Now, those are all questions that a lawyer would have to answer. I wouldn't surprise me if some of these store owners are already having these conversations. I was approaching this as a layperson who's interested in the legal world, but also Lego. I also have two eyes and a brain, and I can see what's in front of me and make comments about it. But here's the reality behind all of this. These owners truly are local community members who invested in what used to be a respected brand, they poured their life savings in it, but they did not sign up to be part of a corporate scandal. They are now collateral damage trying to pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. And there's a couple different options they have. None of them are pretty, but what they need to start doing is start acting like the independently owned and operated stores they claim to be. If they don't, they are just proving the point that corporate has full control over them and they are not independently owned and operated. You need to unblock your comments on social media. You need to allow those low star reviews. You need to allow folks to publicly criticize and comment on your posts, your marketing, your whatnot. Because if you are going to try to get out of your contract, you need to have the evidence to show how this has materially harmed your business. Otherwise, corporate's just getting exactly what they want. They're having their cake and they're eating it too. They're not allowing any public commentary about what they did or didn't do wrong. They're protecting themselves. But you need to protect you. The best way to protect you is to just let the public do what they're going to do. Let that show how it's harming your business. Because look, just staying silent and not doing a thing is only going to make it worse for you. This is not going to go away. This is a huge scandal. No matter what corporate's telling you as the individual store owners, they have an investment in what they want you to think and do. They're not doing that because they actually think it's going to go away. They're trying to keep you silent through this process so you don't make it worse for them. But in the long run, you are the only ones that are going to be harmed by this. The best thing you can do now is go through one of these three different options, or maybe there's a fourth or fifth option I'm not thinking about. But you have to do something. You can't just sit there and wait for this to roll over because this is not going to roll over. I think corporate's biggest miscalculation here was assuming that the public's outrage has peaked. This isn't a normal controversy where people get mad for a week, story dies down, and it just goes away. The story's different because every attempt to suppress information is just creating another chapter in this journey. Every time a video gets challenged, a copyright attempt appears, a takedown request comes, or a legal threat appears, people become more interested, not less. Case in point, I know I said this earlier, but when their PR statement came out about a week ago saying we're at or past the midpoint of the outrage cycle, we were only at like 1 or 2 million views on Ben's videos. I don't think part 2 was even released yet. Charlie hadn't done his videos. The lawyers hadn't really done their videos yet. Since then, we've gone from like a couple million views to tens of millions of views, and this is just the beginning of it. If this is the outrage cycle, if it was in some sort of graph, we're just like starting to go up the hill. They want to think we're at the top coming down the hill, but my friends, we're just starting that journey. And the funny thing is, this cover-up has generated way more attention than just silently correcting the original story ever would have gathered. I'm not even touching on the police corruption yet. I'm not even touching on the religious aspect of it, and I probably won't. But this could have just been resolved, and I just don't understand. He couldn't even admit, the CEO couldn't even admit on the podcast that if he could go back in time and do it all over again, he would just resolve the issue to make it right and take on the liability himself. That doesn't mean you're in the wrong. That just means you're making a family whole that did business with Bricks and Minifigs, somehow got wronged. You're making them whole to make them happy. Then you, Bricks and Minifigs, take on the problem, figure it out, and then hold the people accountable. The fact that you didn't do that kind of tells me you're in on it and you know exactly what you're doing. And like thinking about corporate, what are they angry about? They're angry because people found a way to expose their behavior that they did not want exposed. Yet their whole response has become lawyers, technicalities, takedowns, procedures, claims, suppression attempts. And the whole irony of the situation is that they're furious that somebody used legal loopholes against them while simultaneously using legal loopholes against everyone else. Just look at yesterday. Patreon received a request for the takedown of Ben's channel. They're saying we have a TRO, we should have this removed because of the TRO. Thankfully, the Patreon CEO has a huge pair and is doing the Lord's work, and I literally LOL'd when they told Bricks and Minifigs to stuff it. Good. We need more of that publicly. Specifically, we need more of that from the independently owned and operated franchise owners who do have a voice to speak up, who don't have to use the corporate talking lines. The Patreon CEO pushback is a great example of the larger trend that is starting to emerge, and individual store owners need to take note of this. Not every platform is automatically accepting the corporate narrative anymore. People are actually looking at the evidence and making decisions for themselves. And once you psychologically break away from the narrative that corporate is sending down to their individual store owners, and you use your brain and your eyes and you make a decision for yourself as an independently owned and operated store owner, and you speak up against the corruption that tens of millions of people can blatantly see that we don't need a Slack channel to tell us how we should or shouldn't respond to that. Once you start doing that and making a decision for yourself and your family to protect your investment, that's when we start seeing change. Protecting your investment isn't staying silent and hoping this just blows over, because that's not what's going to happen here. The future of Bricks and Minifigs will not be decided by reckless spend. It won't be decided by YouTube. It won't be decided by the commenters. It's going to be decided by the current franchise owners, because every owner is going to have to answer a simple question. Are you actually independent? Or are you just renting that title while somebody else is making all of the business decisions for you and telling you what to do? And if you truly are independent, at what point do you say enough is enough? Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy with two eyes, a brain, and a shitload of evidence in front of me. When you connect the dots, the future just does not look good in the current state. Staying silent for these franchise owners is not the best solution. Staying silent is just going to dig a hole for themselves. It's best to get in front of this, take accountability, use the public discourse to your advantage. Allow the negative comments, allow the feedback. That is how you show that the brand has been damaged, that your business has been materially damaged, that your agreement is breached due to the lack of the CEO and the corporate entity acting in good faith. But if you choose to allow corporate, the CEO, and the higher ups to get away with what they want you to do, which is just to be silence your critics, silence anybody giving any sort of feedback, they know exactly what they're doing. They're preventing you from being able to show how the brand has been damaged. And at that point, that's on you. Well, that's my take for today.